Welcome to PlanStrongerTV. I'm your host, David Holland. I'm joined on today's program by financial author Steve Repak. Steve is an Army veteran who became a certified financial planner and teaches how to balance spending, saving, debt, and risk-taking. We'll also discuss how to fix some of the most common mistakes and avoid the big ones. Let's roll. All right, welcome to another edition of PlanStrongerTV. Glad to have you with us, and I'm very glad to bring to the program Steve Repak, Certified Financial Planner. Steve, welcome.
David, thanks so much for having me on. I appreciate it.
Thank you, and thank you for your service to our country, 12-year veteran of the Army.
Yeah, spent 12 years, joined the military right out of high school, and got into financial planning.
Well, your story of how you got into financial planning is an interesting one, and I think that if we can give a quick background for the audience, they'll know why you're here on the program and why we're going to be talking about money myths and mistakes that people make and how to avoid them.
Yeah, well, I come from Lyons, Georgia. Come from a very humble background. Mom and Dad, they poor, basically. I don't ever remember going hungry or not having a shelter over my head, but kids didn't make fun of the clothes that I wore, when I was growing up. And so I joined the military right out of high school, and it was the first time I saw real money. And I was getting paid $700 every 2 weeks, and I was like thinking, gosh, do people really make that much money? And the sad fact was it didn't matter how much money I made, I'd always spend more. And over 12 years of service, I left the military with $32,000 of credit card debt. So here I was, fresh out of the Army with $32,000 worth of debt, messed up credit, no money in savings. I mean, just a total mess, and my job was to help people with their finances. So I definitely have a unique story.
Well, and I think you've got a wonderful, I know it was very expensive and painful to get this, but you have an incredible foundation and training, speaking of basic training and Army training, that experience with your own debt really equipped you to be able to guide others. I know you do a lot of teaching. You've authored 2 books, Dollars and Uncommon Sense, and then the 6-Week Money Challenge. I don't know that you would have, and you probably have had this own question in your own mind, whether you would have done the things that you've done if you hadn't had that experience.
Yeah, everybody has a story, and like I said, it definitely, it made a unique situation for me that I'm able to use the issues that I had with my own finances and help others. Because at the end of the day, I mean, that's what we're here for, is to help people with their issues. And it doesn't matter how strong you are, you have some type of weakness. And my weakness is, I had a spending problem, I had a credit card problem, and so finances were near and dear. And I just knew how bad I felt and the stress. And I'm like, gosh, I really want to help people with their finances so they don't have to make the same mistakes that I went through,
Yeah, I think sometimes the general public will put, and it's a nice thing that they do this, but I think sometimes they put certified financial planners, they put us on a little bit of a pedestal as it relates to finances. We make mistakes with our money too, but we know what those mistakes are, and we of course work on them just like everybody else.
Yeah, like I said, we accept, you accept accountability, and then you put a plan together, and then you work through it, and it doesn't get any simpler than that. And so, like I said, most times people they try to make it way too hard, which is not hard. I mean, you know what you make. Do you know how much you're spending? You need to spend less money. And then you take that money, you pay it towards debt, and put it towards savings and retirement. It doesn't get harder, but you need a coach, you need an accountability partner, you need somebody to encourage you. Because like I said, we just make it way too hard, and we do that for a reason, to keep it as an excuse.
Thank you. That's excellent. That's exactly the point I think that a lot of people need to get clear. And I think most people know that, Steve. They just don't. They kind of just turn. They go, I don't want to deal with that. And, the financial industry doesn't really help sometimes with this. Every year it seems as though, in some respects, things get simpler, the easy button, so to speak, but at the same time, the products and the investments and the services that are available get more and more complicated. So I think the question for you and the work you've done helping people, how do we keep it simple? How do we, for somebody saying, well, how do I balance my budget? How do I save for retirement? And you described it very well. Make money, don't spend all of it, save the difference. But how do we keep it simple with this ever-growing complexity?
That's a great question. Like I said, you have to explain how people can understand it. Because if you're in the financial industry, I mean, a lot of this stuff is just common knowledge, but the people that we're trying to help and to counsel and to coach, I mean, they're just totally lost. And a lot of times, we seem to talk over their heads, and they just kind of look at us with that thousand-yard stare, like, what does this person talk about? So you have to break it down into simples, and we have to think of it like this: this is a long-term plan, and then we're trying to get from point A to point B, and we're not going to get there overnight. It's a process. It comes down to the day-to-day decisions to get from here to there. But we never think about that. We never think about the journey. All we ever think about is the results. So if we can get people to quit focusing on the results and concentrate on let's enjoy the journey together, I think we could do finances a lot easier.
Well, and you came to visit us here in the studios from North Carolina. Yeah. There are multiple ways to get to Daytona Beach from North Carolina, right? So the same is true with our finances. There's many different paths and ways, and if you get a detour or you have a flat tire, you got to stop, you've got to redo your plan, you still try to continue on. Yeah. That's really it. So how about, we talked about what people deal with in their everyday lives. What are some of the common money mistakes you've seen people make that perhaps we can illuminate for the audience and have them have some perspective on?
I mean, I think one of the first and easiest ones is just talking about the accountability of their money. I mean, like I said, most people know what they make, but they have no idea what they're spending. And it doesn't matter if you don't make a lot of money, or if you make a ton of money. I mean, that's probably one of the biggest things. Because what happens with the people with a lot of money, they just become complacent, and a lot of wasteful spending that they could either apply towards debt or apply to savings or to give. I mean, so I think that's probably one of the biggest mistakes. That hey, I can be complacent with my money. As long as I'm working, then I'm fine.
Okay. How about some of the easier ones where people, a lot of people you see trip over, where it's so basic that a lot of people just overlook it? Is it some of these, like you talked about with spending, some of the stuff that they can correct? What else?
If I save something, I'll have something. And that's the thing, is that everybody talks about, gosh, I know I need to put money in savings. I know I need to put money in retirement. And they're always, doing all this research on where to put it at. I don't care where you put it. The easiest thing is open up an account and put money into it. If you can do that, then you've just accomplished it. I tell people when they go to the gym, they make their New Year's resolution, the hardest weight that they're ever going to push is the weight of opening the front door. If they can get through the front door, then they've accomplished something. It's the same thing with your finances.
That's true. I imagine that's a great analogy with working out and exercise, that people, and I've done it myself, so I can speak from experience, is, I'm going to plan the perfect workout. I'm not going to work out yet. I'm going to plan the perfect workout, and I'm going to get this figured out, and I'm going to have and I'm reading books, but I'm not lifting any weights. I'm not on that treadmill. So I think we can do the same thing with our finances.
Yeah, it's just being intentional. I'm intentional. I intentionally spend less than I make. I intentionally don't have any credit card debt. I intentionally put money in my retirement. I intentionally put money in my emergency fund. That's being intentional with your finances. That's what it comes down to.
How about biggest mistakes you've seen? I'm sure you've seen people make some doozies. Big mistakes, things that you go, boy, that was, if I could tell some other people not to make that same mistake.
I think probably one of the biggest ones is not put all your eggs in one basket. And I've talked to real estate developers that have all their money in real estate. I've talked to people that had all their money in cash. I've had all their, people that put all their money in the stock market. I think that's probably the biggest mistake.
Going all in.
Going all in, because at the end of the day, we're trying to manage risk. And how you manage risk is not betting it all on one big thing. It's actually, separating into different, allocation classes and things like that. So I think that's probably one of the biggest mistakes that I see, and I see it over and over and over again. So sometimes you need that sunlight. Sunlight makes the best disinfectant. You need a certified financial planner say, hey, you got all your money in your business. You ever thought about short-term savings? Or hey, you have all your money here or there, and a big mistake.
Yeah. They're ready for us, though, Steve. When we talk about them about that, they're ready because they know that they've got a classic example is a person that's got all their money invested in the company they work for, that company's stock if it's publicly traded. And they're ready for us when they meet with us and we say, hey, look, this is something you need to look at. They're prepared like, yes, but. Ready? Yes, but it's growing. I know the company very well. I work there. I know I've got inside information. How do you counter that?
You know, that's a great question. Is that, you know, you have to explain the risk, and you have to. I think people understand stories. I mean, so for example, you say I'm in this great company, it has all these great profits, we're just doing wonderful. You know, then you can talk about the Enron stories, or you can get something near and dear and talk about the local bank. We were, you know, going through a financial crisis, so you can always bring stories in that can relate, and you have to tie it to them. Because, like I said, at the end of the day, if we can break our necks by just stepping out of our beds, we can lose a lot of money if we keep it all in one place.
It's very true. There are 20,000 ex-Enron employees who would say it's a good idea to diversify and not put all your money into the company you're working for, your 401k, taking out mortgage on your houses. We all know the story of how badly things went for Enron. I want to kind of go to another subject which is related. When we start talking about investing versus paying off debt, there's a real clear contrast there. Investing, putting money to work, buying the winning lottery ticket with the investments, it's a lot more interesting and exciting than paying off debt. So how do we get people excited about paying off debt versus maybe, you know, the next best thing or betting on the next stock that goes to the moon?
That's a great question, because you always have people, they have this great idea, and I tell people this is, you know, on guarantees. If I have debt or I have an investment, that bank is going to charge me 16% interest. That's guaranteed. They're not going to say, you know what, Steve, I really like you, and we're going to lower your rate just because we're friends. They care less about that. Anything else is not guaranteed. So I tell people that, you know, you're paying down debt. That's a guaranteed investment. Anything else that you put your money into, you're going to have to assume some type of risk.
So if somebody's got debt, let's just say, let's not even make it 16%, because everybody's going to say, wow, that's high. I mean, 16% is high in pretty much any market. So let's just say it's a little more modest. Let's say it's 6 or 8%, the debt. They're paying 6% interest on debt. They've got money in the bank. They're thinking of investing. Now, me, I would say, let's pay the debt. At what point do you make the call? How low in your mind, because I'm always curious to get other financial planners' perspective, how low in your mind do you think we go before we say, okay, it's kind of like we're still going to make our minimum payment, we're still going to pay the debt, but how low does the debt have to go in terms of a rate before we'll say, all right, maybe we'll invest some money too?
You know, I think of it like this, is that if you don't invest anything, you're not going to have anything. So when I've had this question, they say, well, Steve, you know, if I have credit card debt and I have money to invest, you know, should I put money in the market, or should I put money paying down my credit card debt? I say yes. I mean, that's the answer. At the end of the day, is that you need to be doing both, because if you just concentrate on your debt and you do that through your whole life, you're not going to have anything for retirement. But on the flip side, if you put all your money towards retirement and you have a ton of debt, you're not going to have a lot of money during retirement, because you're going to use most of that to pay down your debt. So it has to be a balanced approach. But like I said, there's not a magic one fits, you know, for one person. But like I said, it depends on the situation. But number one, you better have a goal saying that in this time period, that if I am going to invest some money, that I have to have my debt paid off within X amount of years. It could be 3 years or 5 years. So I'm not more of a dollar amount. I'm more on a time amount that, hey, I want to invest, but I also need to pay down debt. Let's come up with a time to do it all in.
I like your idea of doing both, because if we're doing both, paying down the debt and investing, the other thing that's going to happen is we're going to get excited and we're going to become invested, no pun, invested in that process of addressing both goals, and it kind of forms a habit. And of course, good habit, we reinforce that, and we see we're making progress on both fronts. I think that's a great way to feel good and excited about what's happening.
Definitely, because that's when we're looking at our balance sheet, we're looking at our net worth statement. We have our assets and liabilities. You know, if we want to have a higher net worth, we got to increase one and decrease the other. And so if you're doing it both at the same time, you're kind of killing two birds with one stone.
Well, speaking of two birds with one stone, how about short-term savings versus long-term savings? You know, how do we balance that?
Yeah, that's a great question. I tell people this, before you even think about long-term, if it's money that you need in the short term, you don't put it into long-term. So we get that question answered really quickly. But to tell you the truth is that you got to have, if you say, Steve, I want to be financially healthy, what do I need? Well, I need to have short-term savings, and I also need to have long-term savings. And in the short term, we have to start with where you're starting from. So I talk about, well, do you have $1,000 in savings? They're like, well, I have $1,000 in checking. No. Do you have $1,000 separate from your checking account? And they go, no. Well, we need to build up your short-term savings first. And once we build up your short-term savings, then we can start doing both, because the $1,000 is just the baby step. That's just to say, hey, if you can get $1,000 in your savings, then we can start taking part of that money and maybe invest it. But the truth is that you should have at least 3 to 6 months of your bills. And we talk about discretionary, non-discretionary. That's like a fancy jargon word. I'm saying, what it costs you to pay your bills every month. You say, Steve, my bills are $2,000 a month. Well, you better have about 6 months of your bills in cash. So if your bills are $2,000,
that may take a little while, but it's important to have that reserved.
And that's like a baby. It goes back to the analogy of a baby elephant. How do you eat a baby elephant? You eat it one bite at a time. Now, am I going to be able to save $20,000 in 3 months? Probably not. But that might be something that I can do over 5 years. Like I said, we're trying to get from point A to point B. We're going to follow a plan. We're going to be intentional. Because at the end of the day, if you're not putting money into your savings, you're not going to have money down there. So I'm more concerned with what you're doing now than the results 20 years down the road.
So people need to be realistic. I mean, you talk about sometimes people making excuses, and again, we're not being critical, but it's just who we are as people. But also, don't make the plan so unrealistic that it becomes easy to give up on. I mean, it's got to be realistic that it's going to take some time.
Definitely. And I think another that goes along with it is that the risk that you have to assume, because we understand this basic concept is that the more risk that we take, the potential higher return we might get down the road. But if we can keep our risk lower, it's a lot for the probabilities of getting a X return that's lower than a high return. The probabilities are on your side. But if you're saying, hey, I want to get this crazy, high return, what is the likelihood of you going to get that? It's going to be very, very low.
You're betting on an outlier. You're betting on an outlier of performance, and those don't come around very often. And I mean, how lucky are we, right?
Yeah.
You've talked about in your book about not needing to, it doesn't take $1 million to make $1 million. Talk a little bit about that, because I think that speaks to this ongoing, consistent process of hitting singles, not trying to hit home runs.
Yeah. Like I said, it's being intentional. And I get to talk to the military, and I'll talk to the military. I ask them, do you have $3,000 that you can put in your retirement? And they're like, no, Steve, I can't put that much in there. I'm like, well, can you save $250 a month? And they kind of look, they're like, nah, that's going to be pretty hard to do. I'm like, well, are you wasting $8.33 a day? They're like, yeah, Steve, I'm wasting $8.33 a day.
I can find $8.
Yeah, I can find it. So instead of wasting the $8.33 a day, you start putting it into your retirement. That comes out to be $250 a month. That comes out to be $3,000 a year. Now, if you're like 18 years old and you do that for 20 years, you can end up with a lot of money during retirement. But it starts, number one, I have to be intentional. I got to sit there and take money, and I got to put it into account, and I got to sit there and forget about it.
Okay. It's critical to have that step by step. Now, we talked about having the money available for your emergencies that may come up. I'm a big fan of that. I think that people naturally assume that you and I, being financial planners, want to take every nickel somebody's got and put it in investments. And I think to the contrary, I'm a big fan of cash, having that 3 to 6 months you talked about, because no matter how good a financial plan is, there's going to be emergencies. I'll tell people that, look, we're going to build a financial plan. It's going to be in writing. We're going to follow the plan, but it needs to be carved in Jell-O, not stone. Things are going to happen, right?
Yeah, that's some great advice. Like, even for retirement, I tell people that they, should consider having at least 1 to 2 years of their bills in cash. And they're like, oh my gosh, that's a lot of cash. Well, think of this: if you have your money in risk assets and they drop 50%. Gosh, if you had that cash that could kind of carry you around for 2 years, that kind of gets you, back on the thing. Like, what you're doing is you're trying to mitigate risk. You're not trying to hit the home runs. You don't hire a certified financial planner because they know what the future is going to be. You hire them to mitigate your risk and to keep you from having those unrealistic expectations. To have, to be able to stay focused and be intentional and stick on a plan. To have that accountability partner.
That's perfectly said. I've wanted to tell so many people that, Steve, you put it so well, that people think that we're magicians sometimes, that if you go to see a certified financial planner, that they're going to tell you what the next big stock's going to be, that we're going to be able to see around corners. I mean, our job is to help them address the risks, as you said, and be deliberate and intentional about their actions, because there's so many pieces of this. For example, another part of the plan, and now you also speak to this with your teaching and the work you've done, is insurance. People start wanting to talk about investing, before they've got the proper insurances in place.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, if you don't have your basic foundation, I mean, you have your, your assets, if you want to have assets you want to have for retirement, well, gosh, if you're going to use them all because of an unpreventable death or disability or some type of health need, it kind of wipes everybody out. So, like I said, at the end of the day, you're sitting down with risk managers to put a plan together that, how can I mitigate the risk? How can I transfer the risk from me to somebody else that can handle it a lot better? And you have to do stuff like your long-term care insurance, your life insurance, your disability insurance, and sit down with an insurance professional that can go over all those different, aspects and all the risks that are out there, because we just don't think about it. I mean, all we think about is just getting up and getting through the day, and when is Friday going to get here? And that's what we're thinking about. And we need to start thinking about those morbid things, because nobody wants to talk about death. No one wants to talk about taxes. But that's why they come to a certified financial planner, so we can cheer them up and talk about those types of subjects.
Be cheery and talk about exciting things like that. All right. Well, very good subject, Steve. We could spend days talking about this. I appreciate you being with us. Excellent topic, and I thank you so much for joining us and being able to talk to us and speak to this very important subject. Steve Repak, ladies and gentlemen.
Thanks, David.
Okay, it's time for the scoop. Today's scoop is long-term care insurance. You say, wait a minute, how is that a scoop? Well, here's my scoop for you. There are a lot of different ways to address long-term care or the need for long-term care. Let me get this out of the way. It's expensive, it's complicated, it can be a challenge for a lot of families. It's something that most people don't want to talk about or deal with. But that doesn't change reality that 70% of people over 65 will need some form of care sometime during their lifetime. So let's say that you don't want to buy long-term care insurance. Maybe you don't trust insurance companies, or your health history prevents you from qualifying for coverage. It's insurance, so you have to qualify. We then are left with either self-insuring or coming up with another option. Some people will choose on purpose not to get insurance, and that's okay. We still need to have some sort of plan. That doesn't mean you don't do anything and just hope for the best. We need to think outside the box. We need to think about other ways of getting where we want to be. So I want to share with you just one strategy that might fit for some people. Let's dig in. So one thing I've found is that when people can't qualify for long-term care insurance, or they don't want it, or their situation doesn't lend itself to getting long-term care insurance, then one of the things I look at is, do we have other resources that we can draw on if we need it? The statistic that is often cited, and it seems to get higher every time I hear the statistic, is about 70% of people over 65 are going to need some form of care. Well, that doesn't mean 70% of people are going to end up being in a nursing home for 10 years. It doesn't mean that everybody's destined to a long-term, very expensive care situation. What I recommend is, when we're not going to do insurance, is to look at your other options, look at your investments, look at how you have your estate plan structured, and look at other potential resources like your home. So here's an example of what I'm getting at. If you've got investments or cash or whatever it is, you say, I know it's not enough to pay for care, but it may cover some of it. Okay, that's a very good place to start. Then, if you aren't able to make decisions for yourself, somebody else needs to be able to do that. To do that in that setting, they may need a power of attorney and maybe healthcare power of attorney, two separate documents. So whoever you're going to trust to step in and make decisions when you can't, they need to have those two documents. And it might be more than one person. One person might be your power of attorney for financial stuff, and the other person might be for healthcare. Then you'll also need to have a way to access your investments, but also maybe tap into your home. You might want to establish a line of credit. There's different types of line of credit you might establish, a regular line of credit or a reverse mortgage line of credit that you can pull on, or your designated representative can pull on to use to pay for care. And again, you may never need any form of long-term care. You might be the 30% of that population over 65 that never needs any care. I like looking at options like this, explore things outside the box, because long-term care insurance isn't for everybody. Think outside the box, and you know what I'm going to say, you'll plan stronger.
If you would like more information about the topics and our guests featured in this series, please visit our website at PlanStrongerTV.com. Also, if you have a question you would like David to answer, please send it to questions@PlanStrongerTV.com.